Hi, everybody. Welcome to acTV's Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. Joining me on the program today, I have two great guests. First, Josh Holland of the podcast We've Got Issues is joining us to do the progressive news headline rundown, one of my favorite segments of the month. I'm not going to lie. And then on the second half of the program, we've got a labor update. Bob Hennelly from the Chief Leader is coming on. We're going to talk about several things. Why is labor being blamed for vaccine hesitancy when almost all the heads of labor are encouraging vaccines when they're all vaccinated themselves? Why are Republicans who are supposed to be, pro-police union, doing such things as to put those very same policemen and women in the line of fire when it comes to COVID-19? What about the Kellogg's union movement that's happening? What about the fact that Starbucks almost has a union in upstate New York? We're going to be discussing all of that, and we might even get to the Columbia protests. Hey, there's a lot going on in labor, so stay tuned. This is going to be a great show. Up first, Josh Holland with me in the headlines. My friend Josh, come on with me. Where are you? There you are. It's nice to see you. Uh-oh, I can't hear you. I think you may be muted. Like all of my feelings have been for the last 6 months.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. There you are. Okay, good. Phew. I thought I was going to have to just...
I apologize for that. I had you muted.
No problem. No problem.
By the way, I believe there is a Starbucks union in Buffalo. It's breaking news.
Yes, breaking news.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that.
I think
what
we all
will that
are.
mean for about my coffee is what I want to know.
I don't know. It's union coffee now. Now it's union made.
I mean, it's
at
weird,
least in,
right?
at least in that one Starbucks.
I wasn't necessarily going to discuss this on the program, but since you brought it up, it's just really interesting because people, historically, people who got jobs at Starbucks were just kind of folks who were going to college and needed a job, needed some extra money. And now this kind of job, service industry job, is actually the kind of job where people are trying to support their families. So we're in a new era of work.
There was nothing inherent about manufacturing that made it conducive to unions. It was organizing, right? I mean, there was this rise and fall of unions in the meatpacking industry. They went from being one of the most dangerous, unpleasant, underpaid jobs to a real middle class, you could feed your family job. And then the unions were crushed, and now it is back to very much the way it used to be in the beginning of the last century. So, yeah, I mean, we're seeing a workers' revolt across the country at all levels. Strikes, the number of strikes that have gone on this year is almost unprecedented. And it's something similar that happened after World War I and World War II. All these servicemen came back. They were hailed as heroes. Right now, we're seeing something similar. You can't just tell people that they're, essential workers are heroes and they're essential. We need them and praise them and not have them believe it at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And be like, wow, I am valuable.
But you're not going to pay me. Yeah. Oh, you're frozen. I hope you come back soon. I don't know if you can hear me, but I cannot hear or see you. So if you're stuck there, you can go out and come back in. He went out and he'll be back. Anyway, what we were going to talk about with Josh was the fact that the Washington Monthly has been reporting that based on the data, President Biden and the Democratic Congress are set to preside over one of the strongest 2-year growth performances on jobs, economy growth in decades. That, of course, is as long as the current cycle of inflation continues to ease, or at least begins to ease, and the Omicron variant doesn't trigger, another round of shutdowns, et cetera. But the future path of inflation and the pandemic are large and important unknowns. But if they break right, everything else points to a big Biden boom in 2022. That is from the Washington Monthly. And given this year's remarkable gains in growth and employment, The question remains, why is Biden's approval on the economy so far underwater? It's not all that mysterious. Americans' perceptions of the economy always lag actual economic conditions when those conditions have recently changed. It's crazy. Everyone remembers how terrible the economy was less than 1 year ago, and many Americans are still unconvinced that the turnaround is going to last. What do you think? You could put your thoughts in the comments wherever you are watching. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching on Facebook, and our man John Carlo in the background, not only is he going to be in charge of flipping around these images, getting Josh back on the line, making sure the feed goes out to you, he's also going to read me your comments, which he said he would do. Hey, Josh, you're back just in time. I just set up the next story. Oh, hi. I understand your Wi-Fi crashed, eh?
Yeah, it's a miracle of modern technology. I'm having some issues here. Yes, I got it back up. I'm sorry about that.
We've got issues. The name of your podcast, I do encourage everybody to get it.
We've got tech issues this week, yeah.
I was just talking about, so I set up the story that we had discussed a little bit earlier about what we were going to talk about, and it does kind of fit in with what we were talking about the Starbucks workers unionizing. So the economy, Biden and the Congress basically are presiding over what is being reported as the strongest 2-year performance on growth and jobs in decades. The jobs market is apparently just booming, but how does that square with the fact that, like people with college educations are working in jobs where, they're underutilized, like at Starbucks, for example? I mean, to me, I think they're organizing because they know about organizing from their 101 classes at university. You know what I mean? So they're like, hey, why don't we get on this? Oh, you're frozen again. This is going to be a disaster. I'm going to have to just guess at what you were saying. I know Josh is having a hard time with his internet, so we'll give it another try. But anyway, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? You can put them in the stream and we'll go from there. But
this is really frustrating. I don't know what's happening.
That's okay. We'll just try.
I'm sorry about that. Listen, if we're talking about why the economy is booming and the Democrats are getting no credit for it, I mean, that's fundamentally a messaging problem, I think. Unemployment claims have fallen to the lowest point since 1969. I mean, that's remarkable. The unemployment rate was not supposed to recover. The labor market was not supposed to recover in terms of unemployment coming down to pre-pandemic levels until 2025, and we've shot right past that. Part of it is the media's obsession, almost unnatural obsession with inflation. I think that's filtered down to a lot of people. But part of it is that, and I think that we can kind of trace all sorts of political ills to this. There's such a massive asymmetry in terms of the Democrats' ability to get out a message and stay on message. So you have Fox News and this kind of sprawling conservative propaganda apparatus constantly telling people that things are bad, and there isn't a concerted effort to push back on that. So, that this is only one example of many where I think that's really the heart of it.
What do you make of the fact that everyone's talking about, these unemployment claims are down, but so many people are supporting their families after having a higher education and working in jobs that don't require a higher education?
Well, look, the thing is that we talk about the economy as if it's a homogenous blob, and it isn't that way. Even if you look at something like, I just mentioned inflation, what we're seeing right now is that people at the bottom of the income ladder are seeing their wages increase dramatically, significantly faster than inflation. People at the top are also seeing really significant gains, and people in the middle are not.
Yeah.
So although that's I have to say that breaks.
I worked hard to get into the middle.
I mean, that does break a pattern that we've seen for a long time, where it was the lower end of the labor market that was just continually getting screwed. And it's that group that I think disproportionately is organizing. They're quitting. There's a social revolution going on, and it's not just about money. It's about, dignity and expectations that they be treated like human beings. So there's a big shift going on in our economy. I don't know where it's going to end up. It needs to be supported by better labor law if it's going to endure, but we are seeing some very interesting changes at present. That wasn't quite an answer to your question, but I kind of went tangentially.
I really love the way you can get kicked off Wi-Fi twice and come back swinging with a great answer. You know what I mean?
I'm a pro. I'm a pro.
Josh Holland we're talking
I'm a
about.
pro.
All right, moving on to our next story. I want to talk a little bit about the Remain in Mexico business. Giancarlo, put up that image of Trump. This is how CNN, there we go. Let's get that on there. So this is how CNN reported what's going on because, oh, geez, my eyeballs are barely working here. But so they're reporting about the Remain in Mexico policy having to stay. And they're basically, I keep hearing over and over, the Biden administration is restarting the Trump era border program. No, just that first line is completely inaccurate. There's a court order that a conservative judge put into place that keeps Trump's policy in order. Why again, the messaging? I cannot, it just is so disappointing to me and disheartening that Democrats aren't out there screaming from the rooftops and getting these headlines changed and pushing back. I mean, Biden didn't want to do this. He's trying to educate, he's trying to make it better by giving them, more than tents to sleep in, putting security up. But it's not his fault. It's not like he said, okay, this is my policy. What do you make of this?
Democrats think that the media is going to fairly portray what's going on, the legacy media. And I don't know why. I don't know why they still do. I want to make a point here. You said it was a conservative judge. The judge who ruled on this, first of all, it was two states. I think it was Missouri and Texas. They sued right at the beginning of the Biden administration. They said, we're not going to do this anymore. Or this policy where you had to stay in Mexico to apply for asylum. Remember, these are not migrants. These are not economic migrants. These are people who are seeking asylum. They said, we're not going to do this policy anymore. The first month, the first week that Biden was in office. So Missouri and Texas sued. They had several claims in their lawsuit. Among them was that this was going to cause more people to be released into their states, which would increase policing costs, blah, blah, blah. The argument was enough to convince a Trump appointee. This guy was appointed by Trump as a 42-year-old. So he'll be on the federal bench for another 25 years. And so he ordered that this policy be reinstated. Now, let me just say that there is legitimate criticism of the Biden administration in that they expanded the policy somewhat. The original Trump policy only covered Spanish-speaking people and people from Brazil. They expanded that policy to cover people from everywhere in the Western Hemisphere, including Haiti. So there is some reason to criticize them on that basis.
Do Haitians try to come in through Mexico?
Yes. Yeah. There's been a big surge of Haitians seeking asylum coming up through Mexico. After the assassination of the Haitian president, there was a series of natural disasters there, et cetera, et cetera. And Haiti is in the grips of gang violence, just as are El Salvador and Nicaragua and Guatemala, which is the three countries that are sending most of these asylum seekers to our border.
Oy. Goodness.
Yeah, no, it's a complete mess, and it's a bipartisan mess. And I talked about it a little. This other issue, related issue on the podcast, on my podcast this week. There's 4,000 National Guards troops along the southern border that were sent there by Republican governors from 20 different states. They've also sent like state troopers and maybe like food inspectors, I don't know, to sit there as props, to serve as political props in their propaganda campaign against the Biden administration. And these 4,000 troops, they're legally restricted from doing much except observing, and in some limited capacity they can support border patrol. This is already a heavily militarized border. So they're being separated from their families. They're sitting in these remote outposts in the middle of nowhere. They have nothing to do. And there's all sorts of problems with drugs, with alcohol abuse. They've gotten into 3 times as many car accidents, vehicular accidents, as they have assisted with drug interdiction. So,
and yet those states aren't suing to get rid of those people. Because,
no, and it's not even a story. We talk about the press. If the situation were reversed and Democrats were using 4,000 troops as a political prop, and these troops were miserable and having all sorts of problems, this would be a massive, massive story on Fox News every day. They would be getting hammered for it. And you barely even, I read about this in the Army Times.
It would eclipse the burning of the Fox Christmas tree as the top story.
Christmas apocalypse. The burning Christmas tree.
I like
apocalypse. Just put apocalypse on the back of that one. It's that big. It's that big of it. It's a genocide basically against Christmas.
Obviously,
if you watch Fox and Friends, it is a pogrom against.
They said it was a hate crime.
Christmas tree Americans.
If you hadn't heard the story, I wasn't going to cover it, but and I don't have a picture of the burning tree.
Is it even a story? It's not even a story.
It's not even a story.
Yeah.
A homeless person or a
homeless guy.
Set a tree on fire in New York City, and it was the Fox News Christmas tree, which gotta say, maybe he's not so crazy. Anyway,
his father says he
doesn't like
nuts.
being homeless, and he thinks that Fox is not helpful to the unhoused in this country. I don't know.
Look, the guy obviously has mental health issues. He said that it was lit on fire by mothers who want to rape their children. So, and he had also, I think, exposed himself outside the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, something like that.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not necessarily a war on Christians. Just guy has had a lot of problems. Well,
all right. Our next stories are the following stories that actually, these are what I would consider possibly good news stories. I'd love to have your take on
stories.
Them. And this is the funny part. You don't usually get good news stories out of Democracy Now!, but this is where I got the most depressing.
I think my show is the most depressing, honestly.
No.
We cover a lot of like assault on democracy stuff. So
well, that is depressing.
It's depressing as shit, honestly.
Okay, but here's a couple of things that I heard. So President Biden ordered that federal vehicles and buildings start transitioning to renewable energy. The goal, which of course isn't going to fix all of climate change. Of course, that's what everyone's going to bitch about. But the goal is reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. The executive order affects 300,000 buildings and 600,000 cars and trucks. I mean, it's a step, right?
Yeah. People, there's a million things going on at all times in the sprawling federal bureaucracy that get no attention. And it's remarkable. When during the Trump presidency, I had a weekly column covering things that nobody paid attention to. And it was always like agency level stuff. And there was this recurring theme where the Trump administration, they would be like, okay, we're going to deregulate this terrible pollutant. And then the industry would be like, we don't want that deregulated. We did not ask you for this. You're going beyond what even we lobbied you for. This was a consistent theme. So now we have a new administration. We have thousands of new people at the agency level heading these agencies, and a different prioritization entirely. The elections matter. Elections have consequences.
Well, actually, these next two little pieces of news are right along that line. The Senate voted to confirm Jessica Rosenworcel as the chair of the FCC. She will be the first woman to serve as the permanent chair of the agency. And she's actually great. You know, she was a fierce critic of the repeal of net neutrality protections. I don't know what she's going to be able to do on that, but most digital rights activists are happy with this appointment.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I know. So that's good. And then Jonathan Cantor, he's an anti-monopoly expert. Do you know this guy? He was confirmed to head the Justice Department's antitrust division. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, there's a really antitrust was an area that was neglected by both parties for decades. And there is an emerging just in the last few years, and this is partially embraced by some intellectuals on the right, partially because of their conspiracy theories about all of these large institutions, social media companies being biased against them, which is nonsense. But it has spurred a renewed interest in antitrust law, and it's good for progressives. Antitrust is good for progressives.
That is very good.
Yes.
The Senate also unanimously confirmed Chuck Sams the third in November, the first ever Native American National Park Service director. I don't know Mr. Sams's positions on things, but I'm just going to make a general assumption that he's not going to want to like plow down the butterfly reserve to put up a wall like Trump's guy wanted to do. Yeah.
I heard that. So that butterfly preserve right on the border has been getting so much problems. It's become this lightning rod for right-wing extremists. They've been cutting holes in their fences. It's a crazy story. Really? Butterfly preserve down in Texas. Thrust into the national spotlight, butterfly reserve.
Not the butterflies.
Just let them be. Let the butterflies be.
And in our final story, I actually pulled this directly from your Twitter feed because I find your Twitter feed very interesting. Okay. You wrote, let's just put up the image, Giancarlo. We've got this image.
Are we doing this with a tweet?
Yeah, we're doing this from this is from Axios. Apparently, there was some sort of study that showed that nearly a quarter of college students wouldn't be friends with someone who voted for the other presidential candidate, with Democrats far more likely to dismiss people than Republicans. That's according to Generation Lab Axios polling. Why does this matter? It says partisan divide.
They should stop right there. Why does this matter?
Exactly.
Why does it matter? Who cares?
I don't know. All right. It says
so this is a study of young people, though, first of all, right?
Yeah. It said that 71%, this was the highlighted portion you'll see here. 71% of Democrats wouldn't go on a date with someone with opposing views versus 31% of Republicans. Tell me your thoughts about this, Josh.
Yeah. So I have a few thoughts on this. First of all, I'm surprised that 29% of young people would go on a date with somebody who is
29% are watching Kim Kardashian's Twitter feed. They don't even know what the hell's going on. Anyway.
I mean, we're talking about, would you go on a date with somebody who is probably opposed to abortion rights, who may be a QAnon person, who is an anti-vaxxer, probably, who is belligerent about masks, who believes conspiracy theories about Antifa and thinks it was okay to storm the Capitol, who opposes the Black Lives Matter movement? I'm surprised it's 29%. The other thing about this poll is that I don't believe its findings at all. There was another finding is they asked, would you be friends with somebody who from the opposite party? Only 5% of Republicans said that they would have problems being friends with a Democrat. And if you look at the conservative media and their constant demonization of Democrats, like the most horrific people in the world, I have a very hard time believing that. I don't buy it at all.
That's really very interesting. That's interesting. So I don't know about this. I find that the Christian-y types on the right feel like they have to be friends with you, even though the hate is being drummed up. I don't think they're going out to any like Democratic, town council meetings to make new friends. But if you're already friends with the person, it seems like, I don't know. It's hard to know. I mean, young
Look,
people
this
still meet people
also,
like by playing on the same rugby team, and where you don't bring up politics until later, that you find that the reason that person is so strong and buff is because they're building a shelter to live out the end times in their backyard. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, the other point that I would make about this poll is, so it's a poll of young people again, and young people skew broadly to the left. And the college Republicans, the college Republicans are really like wingnuts and trolly wingnuts and kind of belligerent about it. Again, it seems like 29% is higher than it should be. Like I'm single. I would not date somebody whose values are so antithetical to my own.
That's because we're older and we're done. You have to fit into this tiny slice of acceptability.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not be annoying.
Honestly, also with young people, like you might just hit it. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. What does
When
dating exactly
you're in
mean?
college, like whatever.
Well, with that, Josh Holland, host of We've Got Issues, coming on the show. This is probably our last progressive news headlines for the year.
For the year, yeah.
I do thank you for being a part of this program. I love having you on.
It's been so much fun. It's been so much fun. I'm going to work on the lighting next time a little.
Yeah. No, I like this bunker look.
Yeah, I've got a bunker thing going on. It's not my best. I'm going to work on the background. That's going to be my New Year's resolution. I'm going to work. You have a lovely background, by the way, Julianna.
Thank you. This is my brand new background.
Yeah.
Actually, hold on. Let's back it off. Okay. I'm going to give you and the viewers an opportunity to see.
Oh, yeah. That's lovely.
Cat statue.
Yeah. So Room Raider should really do your background there. That's a 10 out of 10.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope so.
10 out of 10.
All right, Josh. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it. And I will see you in the new year.
Thanks, Julianna.
You are watching actTV. This is actNOW. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're watching. Coming up next, our labor report. As soon as I got on the phone with Bob to talk about one story, we talked about 10 stories. So we're going to get right to it. Coming up next. Bob Hennelly's joining me next to give us a labor rundown. Bob, thanks for being on the program today.
Thanks for having me. I was trying to decide if I should do the hat that I wear when I'm walking around or not. So it's hard to know.
Wait, you got to bring your face into the square. There you go.
There you go. We're good to go.
I like that hat. No, that's a very journalistic hat.
It is. It's authentic.
It is wonderful. Bob Hennelly is a labor reporter and other reporter, and also has a radio show on WBAI for the chief leader. Bob, thanks for coming on the program today. We have so much to discuss.
Yes, we do.
All right, let's start with how Republicans are betraying cops and other essential workers.
Well, first you have to go back and look at where we are. So we've had an insurrection. We're in the middle of a pandemic that's still going on, that's claiming well over 1,000 lives every day. This has been one of the greatest challenges for working people that we've ever had in the country. And that's really not framed that way, but it needs to be. Consider that we're on our way to 800,000 people that have died from this disease, 50 million people infected. And what no one really knows for sure is how many essential workers have died just in the process of doing their job. Mm-hmm. Here at the Chief Leader, which I have to show up, of course, a copy. This is the Chief Leader newspaper.
Beautiful.
Yeah, there we go. Since 1897, we've recently been purchased, and now we're on the brink of making a national labor paper, which is long overdue.
Very exciting.
But the piece of the story that has not been told about workers is just how many people have died as a consequence of just doing their job. Here in New York City, where we pay close attention, 400 civil servants have died of various titles. We do know, for instance, that an additional 170 some odd members of the MTA, which is our transit network, members of Local 100 TWU have died. These are subway operators and bus operators. And so imagine the Guardian newspaper and Kaiser Health kept track of, up until April of 2021, close to 4,000 nurses and medical professionals died in the United States related to COVID. So we really don't have any idea. So this is essentially, it's a labor story, and we're seeing a response. They're calling it the Great Resignation because people are reevaluating their relationship with work. The government failed us for a period of time here where, even though a pandemic was something we knew was happening, President Obama actually had, like a workbook that if you were in the Oval Office, you could go there and look at it, how to fight a pandemic. With Ebola, we had some frame of reference related to.
Bob, come back into the square.
I can figure out. There we
come back. There you go.
There we go.
A little to the left, a little to the right.
You know what happens when we used to have camera people. Remember
I remember those days.
Yes, remember that. And
this
then
was someone else's job.
Right. So this is a pivotal moment here because labor now has leverage it's never had before because 4 million people a month are leaving their jobs.
Which is so odd because I was just talking with Josh about this new Washington Monthly report on some data saying that, jobs, income, the growth, it's all shooting through the roof. It's actually the strongest 2-year performance in those areas in, I guess, decades. But,
right.
When everyone loses their job and then everyone gets a new job, perhaps that skews the numbers a little bit.
Well, I mean, one of the things, too, is that what's happening is we do have this over 2 million women have left the workforce. This mass death event, which is what we're in the midst of, right? We really don't even have a frame for this. The last time this happened was 1918, 1919, 1920, kind of at the edge of living memory. Mm. And so this traumatic event is happening also at a time where people came through, going back to the 1970s, wages were actually declining. It's very important to understand that the recent blip we're seeing is just a very limited thing. If you look at history, I mean, historically, people were working longer hours and found themselves falling behind further and further. Mm-hmm. And so this a 2-year period of the pandemic still has exaggerated this decline for some people. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's happening is we now are in an inflationary cycle where if you are struggling week to week, which tens of millions of American families are, then this inflationary cycle, which is taking such a toll on things like gasoline and groceries, is devastating. So while in the aggregate, it looks like wages are going up, for families that have been struggling right along, you're dealing with a situation where all the supports are starting to disappear. Like, for instance, holding off on evictions, holding off on foreclosures. All those things were put as a stopgap measure. Those things are being pulled back now. And so we have a situation with a precarious economy. I mean, it's going gangbusters if you're equipped for it. But if this caught you in a difficult position, it's even harder now.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's transition to the piece that you wrote for Salon recently that really took to task the fact that the Republicans who say they're so pro-police, Blue Lives Matter, right. And the police who are so, overwhelmingly, I think, vote Republican, ally with the Republican Party, the Republicans, the rank and file Republicans are tossing those folks under the bus.
Well, primarily the piece that I did for Salon was related to, first of all, let's go to January 6th, 2021, where we had this surreal image of Trump insurrectionists beating Capitol police officers with Blue Lives Matter flags. Mm-hmm. Blue Lives Matter flags. So keep that image. Now scroll forward to what happened just, I guess, December 2nd here in New Jersey, where the Republican Assembly members, a certain faction, really strong Trump supporters, bum rushed the state police, violating the COVID public health protocols requiring proof of vaccination or a negative test to get onto the floor of the assembly. And so in the process of doing that, they put themselves at risk because they are the anti-science party. And so one of the things that people haven't paid attention to, and this picks up where we started, several hundred police officers have died from COVID, serving and protecting people all through this period of time. It's the single greatest cause of death for law enforcement. Several hundred firefighters, particularly firefighters, west of the Mississippi, we tend to have firefighters who combine EMS function. And same thing's true in much of the country. So these individuals were the frontline response in the nursing homes, the places where things really came apart. They're the people who have been taking the brunt of it. And actually, during the time that Trump was in, he did everything he could to dismantle the federal unions that were pointing out that this problem was getting traction. The first place that people died, and this is logical, was the TSA, Transportation Security Administration. In airports, their members were coming down with this and dying. They begged for masks. They begged for contact tracing. None of it was granted to them. The federal government resisted it. You have to look at the things that were going on in the meat packing plants in this country where...
Yes, we have been following these stories. Exactly. And I think it's very interesting to get up to date to today that they really haven't changed their attitudes at all. I mean...
Right. In fact, one of the things that's happened is that there is, at least, and we can get into this a little bit more, one of the positive developments is, because elections do matter, when President Biden came in, he appointed former Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, very pro-labor, to lead the Department of Labor. One of the things that was missing throughout the entire COVID pandemic was a response from occupational health people that should have been helping create a standard, because we were in such uncharted territory. And so one of the things that's happened is the Biden administration and OSHA and Secretary of Labor Walsh came up with a policy of get vaccinated and or get tested for private employers. You've probably heard about this. If you have 100 or more employees, the emergency guidance would be get a test or get vaccinated. And so that's for the private sector. Now, in the public workforce, the president did mandate that federal employees, and there's like 2.5 to 3 million of them, get vaccinated. But here's the difference between some of the things we've seen, like here in New York, where Mayor DeBlasio has kind of got a coercive approach. He's either get vaccinated or you lose your job. No conversation, really. But the federal model is one where they were working with the unions. And so that's the key issue here. It's very important for people to understand. I don't know a union that's opposed to vaccination. What they're opposed to is a process where it's imposed on people without a respectful conversation that takes into account things like legitimate health exemptions. Because, by the way, as great as these vaccines are, there are a list of contraindications. And people need to have the ability, especially if this mandate is imposed after they were employed, to go through the process to protect themselves and their families. And so when we see this business of just imposing it without a conversation, it's very disrespectful to essential workers who have been giving everything, in many cases, putting their families at risk through this pandemic.
We have a video that you sent, or that you showed me about, you mentioned Bill DeBlasio, and Bill
Right.
DeBlasio has come out and said that now everybody from their mother to their uncle has to get the vaccine, no matter what. And these let's take a look at the video. But I was going to share it from here, but Giancarlo, do you have it over there that you could pull up? I'll give you a second to, figure out what's what in the background.
It is live TV.
It is live TV, and we have a beautiful producer who can, he does all kinds of great things, but he's not here in my house to run my camera.
Oh, are you allowed to do this?
I don't know. Yeah, I think so. So we have this video of DeBlasio. We're going to watch a few minutes of it. We might watch the whole thing if we can stomach it, where he is talking on MSNBC in the morning about the vaccine mandates that are happening in that he is putting in New York City. Let's take a listen. And then Bob, you and I spoke a little bit about how his technique plays right into like the right-wing narrative. Let's take a listen.
Since the Omicron variant was detected, 17 states have had confirmed cases, at least 10 of which are in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area. At least one case was detected in a person who had just went to a convention at New York City's Javits Center, an event attended by more than 50,000 people. That's not good. Joining us now, the mayor of New York.
Can you pause this,
New York
Giancarlo?
City, Bill DeBlasio.
Pause this for a second. I just want to point out that this was an anime convention, and I think that bears pointing out for some reason. My producer said that it was embarrassing.
It's the second time on the show in the last 3 weeks that we've discussed anime, and frankly, that's too much, Juliana.
Second time in the last 2 weeks, and second time over the past 20 years of my career. So,
is this like a drinking song? Do we drink now?
Are there going to be like 500 Santas coming out of this thing? I don't know. I'm way behind on what's what. Anyway, let's listen to Bill DeBlasio.
And Bill, you are revealing right now new measures to keep COVID infection cases down. What are they?
Yeah, Mika, look, we just talked about an attack on democracy. Well, we're under attack a different way right now from the coronavirus. And we've got Omicron as a new factor. We've got the colder weather, which is going to really create additional challenges with the Delta variant. We've got holiday gatherings. We in New York City have decided to use a preemptive strike to really do something bold to stop the further growth of COVID and the dangers it's causing to all of us. So as of today, we're going to announce a first in the nation measure. Our health commissioner will announce a vaccine mandate for private sector employers across the board. All private sector employers in New York City will be covered by this vaccine mandate as of December 27th. We're going to have some other measures as well to really focus on maximizing vaccination quickly so we can get ahead of Omicron and all the other challenges we're facing right now with COVID.
And curious, first of all, that's anybody and everybody who works in New York City has a vaccine mandate at this point. How do you enforce this?
We're going to work with the business community, and we've seen a lot of cooperation so far when we had put in place our mandate, for example, for restaurants, indoor entertainment, indoor fitness. We actually got a lot of cooperation. There were a few times where we had to penalize people, but it was rare. So we're going to put together the rules, work with the business community. But I'll tell you something, Mika, the fact that this is universal, and this would be my advice to mayors, governors, CEOs all over the country, use these vaccine mandates. And the more universal they are, the more likely employees will say, okay, it's time. I'm going to do this, because you can't jump from one industry to another or one company to another. It's something that needs to be universal to protect all of us.
So, Mr. Mayor, you see
All right,
here,
you
one
got
of
to
the
pause
other
it here.
measures is
Pause it, because I can't take another word. Giancarlo, I brought you on, Bob, to talk about this. I feel like after watching that for the third time today, I have so much to say that I'm just going to have to let you talk first.
Okay, so here's the thing. What's important here and is not said is the fact that Bill DeBlasio is in a difficult position. He's got hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal bills from problems he ran into related to soliciting campaign cash that was kind of borderline. He didn't get, indicted or anything, but it's certainly where he's had to have a lot of legal counseling to get himself through some pretty aggressive ways of raising money and doing business. That said, he has decided that he hasn't announced yet, but he's been flirting with running for governor. So he's on a footing, because he's on his last couple of weeks here in New York as mayor, that the only way, if this is the only thing you know how to do, right, run for something, and that's pretty much what he's done his whole life, then you have to continue to have a campaign to raise cash so you can retire all the other costs related to your prior runs. It's a family business. So it's in that environment that he actually gets himself on MSNBC, CNN, because he decides that, notice the phrases, exclusively we're going to announce here. Here's a problem with that. I'm glad he's so down with businesses, but he has here a very robust labor movement in New York City, the New York City Central Labor Committee. the building trades. These are all unions that have that are supporting vaccination, that are not against getting vaccinated, have done their own promotions within the ranks of them. Why not include them if you're talking to businesses all the time? And that's another thing. The leader, Catherine Wild, who's one of the leading, I would say, spokespeople for the business interests, apparently they were surprised too. Like nobody really got spoken to by the only people I think knew about this in advance were the segment producers for Morning Joe. Now the problem with this.
Wait, I just before I want to ask you a question. You said he's trying to raise money. How is he doing that? Do you think he's getting money from the pharmaceutical industry?
He's flirting with the run for governor.
I'm sorry. I didn't. Let's talk at separate times. Like, how does him putting in a vaccine mandate help him to raise money? I'm not following.
It raises his visibility. Why else would he be able to get, as a guy who's got 8 seconds left in office, get on CNN, all the local channels here, and prime time on MSNBC?
Because if he says he's going to raise a vaccine mandate, that's going to make him, on national news, and he's going to have to go all over the place.
And in this business, a raised profile is the way you become a viable candidate. He's been sending out.
Who's he going to run for? The right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how people. I guess everybody feels like people are fed up and they believe vaccine mandates are a good idea. But as you said in our conversation before the show, this plays right into the narrative of the right. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So one of the important things here is that we have two different models that are being used here. So Sarah Nelson, who leads the flight attendants union with the CWA, they have to, have 50,000 flight attendants with 17 different air carriers. That model was one where United Airlines was enlightened enough to meet with the unions prior to rolling out the requirement for vaccination. So the unions worked it out with management and then promulgated a policy. That's a big difference. And then we have DeBlasio's approach of imposing it without a conversation.
But aren't they mostly public sector unions in New York? And he's talking about private sector.
Well, he did the public sector first with the really negative consequences and creating all kinds of problems. Now, it did, and he'll point to this, it did get a 94% compliance for the civil service in New York City, which is roughly, and it's important to know also, the state helped out a little bit here because healthcare workers, and appropriately so, when you consider the situation they're in, already were operating under a mandate that started getting momentum both at the federal level with the Veterans Administration and with prior Governor Cuomo and with Governor Hochul, who succeeded Cuomo. But the bottom line is this idea of this authoritarian approach of not respecting particularly unions, that's the kind of thing where Republicans, as you say, really that these folks on the left, they're Stalinists. They don't really care about what workers think. And so
Republicans hate unions.
Well, they made inroads. I mean, it's important to understand that historically, while they don't get leadership, they
bust unions and they undermine them.
They also have many, and I'll tell you, there are many folks who are told by their union leadership to vote Democratic, but go in there incredibly and vote for a Republican. These states like Ohio and Pennsylvania that have been so troublesome for Democrats to win, at the heart of it is the fact that the grassroots labor movement is often alienated from the people that lead the labor movement. And that's a much deeper story.
Yeah, that is a good story. And that's what we were kind of talking about when I said they don't, they still vote against their own best interests in some areas, but voting is not always one issue, right? We've got our wedge issues. I know in Pennsylvania, we've got a lot of religious folks there who will vote the abortion issue, regardless of whether they're in a union or not. Right. So I don't know. The way I see it is exactly that point that you made sort of toward the end there, which is the Republicans are trying to paint all Democrats, including Joe Biden and including everyone, as these authoritarians who can invade your privacy and give you and force you to have a vaccine in order to trade, in order to do business. And they actually have, I do a lot of following of this movement of, evangelicals that
Right.
believe that we're in the end times. And one of the things that was said is you will have to take the mark of the beast and you will not be able to trade. This is like a quote from, I guess,
Right.
Revelations. I don't know. You
Right.
won't be able to trade without or participate in the
Right.
marketplace without this mark. And they believe that the vaccine is this mark of the beast. And then Bill DeBlasio basically says, you can't do anything without, you can't work without having the
Well,
vaccine.
what it's also done is it's created a situation with the proliferation of forged vaccine cards, which is in certain. And so what you do is when you create this environment, you create an occasion for crime and for individuals to do things they would normally wouldn't even consider. So that's what I'm saying.
What law is a vaccine mandate based on? It just seems.
This goes back. There is some case law that goes back to the early part of the 20th century, Massachusetts precedent, which established the ability in an infectious disease situation for the local health authorities to establish basic protections. There is also certainly precedent in the school systems around the country. We know that you have to have a certain list of vaccines to get. I know you have a daughter, and so inoculations are required to go to school. But prior to COVID, that consensus was beginning to unravel. And we saw people saying, you know what, not for my kid. And so since all this is based on whether it be whooping cough or measles, it's based on a buy-in, on people collectively making a decision to support each other. And so I submit to you that this unraveling of America that we're seeing here, which is really, it's like we have two health problems here: suspicion and distrust, but then also the virus at the same time. And now that distrust is feeding the virus.
I know, but aren't we both from WBAI? Isn't distrust an important? I mean, when did the left go from like we distrust everything to like we should trust everything? That's
the nuance we're talking about. Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly. It's very strange. And then, today we also just a few, half a day ago, 2 Democrats and every Republican senator voted against President Biden's private employer vaccine or test mandate. Now that's an interesting thing because vaccine or test is not actually a vaccine mandate. It's
not
test or vaccine. You can have your choice, which means you don't have to.
Well, one of the problems here and that we have to remember is the CDC and the government has really had some major problems with credibility through this. And so anytime you're in a position where you're asking people to trust you, you have to be self-aware and look at your own problems historically. So let's just quickly review for people that have been following this as closely as those of us in the media, okay? Remember when this thing first hit, the CDC's guidance back in the beginning was that they were telling nurses and healthcare professionals that the N95 masks, which they're trained, are supposed to be removed after each clinical encounter. Okay, that's important to keep in mind. After every interaction with a person that may be infected with an infectious disease, you're to take off your friendly N95 mask and throw it away. Well, the CDC said, with an eye towards inventory and the lack of preparation by our own federal government, no, you're going to hold on to your N95 mask and make it your pet. You will put it in your lunch pail. You'll bring it back and forth with you for a week because guess what? We don't have enough to go around. They told the subway conductors and train personnel, don't wear a mask in public. You'll scare people.
Oh, I remember that. Right. I remember going to the grocery store at Whole Foods and they were like, well, we can't wear a mask in here because the business, Amazon told us not to.
At the time, the nurses unions warned that this would mean that they would end up spreading the disease, that they would end up dying themselves, they would infect their families, and the hospitals would become a vector for the virus. Julianna, that's exactly what happened because of the lack of preparation. Now scroll forward to May of this year when the CDC announces they want to lift the universal mask mandate for everyone that's been vaccinated. And the same unions say, you don't have enough people vaccinated, and you're going to have a situation where you're going to have a variant spike. Hello, Delta. So all I'm saying is they've made mistakes, and that's important for them to.
I don't think it was a mistake to tell the nurses that they had to take a mask and put it in their pocket. It was against the reality of what it is. But what were they going to say? We can get you. We don't have enough masks. They shouldn't have lied to us. They should have said, we don't have enough masks.
Well, I also think that there's a question here about all that period of time. They should have, Trump was denied. It's important to note that the leadership of the government was denying was a problem at all. And indeed, the chief executive of this country misrepresented the nature of the disease and then had the states fight each other.
Yeah, I remember. I lived through it. And in fact, I don't want to live through it again. I don't want to live through it with a variant. I don't want to live through it in my mind. It's like too much already. But it is interesting that, your piece in Salon, I encourage everyone to go take a look at. It's in Salon. It talks about, it gives really the numbers and the breakdown, and it really talks about the disrespect that Republicans are showing to law enforcement. And I appreciate you pointing that out, because law enforcement are workers, and
they are. And by the way, this is my book, Stuck Nation.
I've got it here somewhere on my shelves.
Yes, that's right. And
sorry, it's off screen.
When the United States changed course on our history of choosing profits over people. Available at Democracy at Work.
Available at Democracy at Work. You can follow Bob at Stuck Nation on Twitter. Bob, thanks for coming on the program. I appreciate it. One last question for you.
Yes.
Did you hear breaking news today? Just knowing that you're plugged into labor and you know all about this stuff. Let's discuss Starbucks, shall we?
A very big deal.
Huge, right?
It is. And it's up in Buffalo. And so this is the first of 9,000 locations. And it is, the earth moved a little bit today because Starbucks put a lot of money into fighting this. And we have a chance to do a revote about Amazon down in Bessemer, Alabama. NRLB has ruled that Amazon stepped over the line there and did some illegal stuff and trying to suppress the interest in the union.
Right.
So I say to my daughters, sorry about the planet, but the labor market's looking up.
Bob Hennelly, Robert Hennelly at Stuck Nation on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Hey, you're watching Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. I think it was interesting how we were able to talk to Josh and Bob about some of the same issues. Just in case you just joined in, it's the three. And you didn't read the Starbucks thing. 3 Starbucks locations in Buffalo, New York, will soon be the company's first unionized U.S. shops, because the votes being counted today, in this highly anticipated election. 3 other Starbucks stores in Buffalo and 1 in Mesa, Arizona, have also filed petitions for their own union elections. It's very interesting. I wonder if the Starbucks union will join forces with the Amazon union. Will join, I wonder if we'll see a big sort of nationalization of the union issue. Meanwhile, Kellogg's workers remain on strike after rejecting a tentative agreement that included a 3% raise. Kellogg said it would start replacing striking workers with permanent hires. And in more labor news, members of the UAW, the United Auto Workers, voted in favor of the one-member, one-vote system, which will allow workers to directly elect their president and other leadership. The election reform came after a federal corruption probe, which found that UAW leaders were using union funds to not get that Toyota Camry, but maybe get something a little higher up, luxury purchases, and to support some lavish lifestyles. I love the way they report that right after they report. That's one of our major newspapers here. They love to poop on union leaders and union leadership. Hey, there's corruption wherever you go, but it is exciting that the workers of the world are uniting. Am I right? Any kind of unity, especially under these divisive conditions that we're in, I think is wonderful. Personally, I think the union movement is so important, specifically because something Bob pointed to, which is there are people who vote Republican, there are people who vote Democrat, there are your Bernie people, there are your libertarian people, and they're all in the same union who want to be treated fairly on the job. And it is one place where unity is actually a possibility and can spring from. And no wonder corporate forces seek to crush them so vehemently. Anyway, I'm Julianna Forlano. Next week, we have 2 shows, one on Tuesday at 2 p.m., one on Thursday at 2 p.m. So tune in wherever you're watching. Thanks again for watching, and I appreciate you. Have a great weekend.